You know, we often talk about strategies and principles for success, but what if the biggest hurdles are actually, well, unseen, lurking inside our own minds?
That's a great starting point.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into Chapter 15 of this text, 15.pdf, and it tackles exactly that.
hmm
Our mission really is to unpack what the author calls the 6 ghosts of fear. Things like indecision, doubt, stuff that can really sabotage our efforts.
Sabotage trying to apply any positive philosophy, yeah.
Nice.
And stop us from achieving a richer life, however we define richness.
Absolutely.
That's right. Think of this chapter as like laying the groundwork.
Okay.
Before you build anything grand, you've got to clear the site, right? Make sure the foundation's solid.
Makes sense.
So this chapter is all about clearing out those mental weeds, those
Yeah.
fundamental fears, and really understanding how they operate, specifically in your own mind.
Right. Getting personal.
Yeah. The author really emphasizes identifying these fears.
Yeah.
Almost like, naming your adversaries, learning their habits.
And knowing where they hide out in the subconscious.
Exactly.
And it's that last part that feels crucial, isn't it? These aren't always obvious, like big, flashing anxieties.
Not at all. The text suggests they can be pretty subtle, operating under the surface, influencing thoughts, actions.
Without us even fully realizing it. So we really need to shine a spotlight inward today.
We do. And the chapter kicks off by highlighting how 3 specific things are deeply connected: indecision, doubt, and fear.
The unholy trio, as the author puts it.
That's the phrase. And each one feeds the next.
Okay, let's break that down. Indecision is called the seedling of fear. That's quite a metaphor. How does simply not deciding plant something like fear?
Well, the author explains that when you keep putting off decisions, stay in that limbo of uncertainty, that initial hesitation that starts to harden, it crystallizes into doubt.
Ah, okay.
You start questioning yourself, your goals, your plans. You're like, can I really do this?
It's like a small crack in the foundation, maybe, that just widens over time.
That's a perfect analogy. It weakens the whole structure. And then this is the key step, that lingering indecision and the growing doubt, they kind of merge together.
And the result is fear itself.
Fear itself, that's the offspring of that union.
So it's a slow burn then, a gradual wearing away of confidence.
Exactly. And the text makes a point that this often happens without us noticing, which makes it really dangerous.
Right, it's not a sudden ambush, more like a stealthy infiltration.
Precisely. These mental adversaries, they rarely announce themselves loudly. They work in the shadows, taking root, expanding gradually.
Which just highlights the need for constant self-awareness, maybe, and being willing to confront even tiny bits of indecision or doubt.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So once we get how fear takes hold, the chapter points to the main sources, the 6 basic fears.
Okay, so what are these fundamental anxieties that supposedly underpin everything else?
According to the author, these 6, listed in order of how common they seem to be, are the fear of poverty,
Okay.
the fear of criticism, the fear of ill health, the fear of loss of love,
Right.
the fear of old age,
Hmm.
and finally the fear of death.
That's quite the list.
It is. And the argument is that pretty much all other fears we feel are just like minor versions or can be grouped under these main 6.
Like a taxonomy of anxiety almost, boiling it all down. And it's interesting how the text links which fear is dominant to historical times.
Yeah, like the Depression bringing up the fear of poverty or wartime making the fear of death loom large for everyone.
But what's really significant here, you think, is the author's claim that these fears, even though they feel incredibly real,
Or ultimately nothing more than states of mind.
right, and as states of mind,
They're controllable. We can direct them. That's a really empowering idea, isn't it?
it is. It suggests we're not just victims of our fears, but we can actively manage them.
They even use that example of doctors, how they're constantly exposed to illness but often get sick less.
Because they don't fear it as much.
That's the idea.
Hmm.
It shows how our mental state can actually impact our physical reality.
Which really drives home that central theme, the incredible power of our thoughts.
Exactly. The author elaborates on this, saying everything that comes into being physically starts as a thought impulse.
Okay, let's dig into that power of thought a bit more. The text suggests these initial thoughts, whether we create them consciously or even pick them up through the ether,
Yeah, from the collective.
they have a direct route to becoming tangible things. That's a pretty profound concept.
It is. And the author stresses its importance. It means the thoughts we consistently focus on, even the ones that just pop into our heads, can seriously shape our reality, our finances, our work, relationships.
It leads into that discussion about why some people seem lucky and others unlucky.
Right. And the explanation given is that we all have this innate power to completely govern our own minds.
So the lucky ones might have just learned, maybe unconsciously, to tune into positive thoughts and filter out the negative fear-based ones.
Precisely. The text says nature gives us absolute control over just one thing, our thoughts. And since everything starts with a mental blueprint,
Controlling our internal landscape becomes the key to overcoming fear and shaping our lives.
which also makes it clear why the author says fear thoughts and poverty thoughts can never lead to courage and wealth.
You can't plant weeds and expect roses.
Exactly. You have to align the thought energy with the result you want. And that example of the Wall Street crash and the Depression.
As mass fear crystallizing into reality, it's a powerful, if sobering, example.
It really shows how a dominant thought, when lots of people buy into it, can manifest on a huge scale. And this sets us up for looking at each fear individually, starting with what the author calls the most pervasive and destructive.
The fear of poverty.
Yes, that one gets a lot of focus.
It does. It's immediately framed as this fundamental clash, right? The author says there's no middle ground between poverty and riches. They move in opposite directions.
Very direct, very uncompromising. And riches here isn't just cash.
No, it's defined broadly: financial, spiritual, mental, material well-being.
And the starting point for getting those riches, as we talked about before, is desire.
Right. So this chapter on fear is like the prep work, preparing your mind to actually use that desire effectively.
Exactly. Preparing the soil before planting the seed. You've got to clear out the weeds of fear so the desire can actually grow.
And the challenge laid down for you, the listener, is pretty stark, isn't it?
It is. Make a conscious choice. Accept poverty or demand riches. The author says it's a choice none of us can avoid.
It's a strong call for personal accountability.
And demanding riches isn't just wishing. It means defining exactly what form and amount will satisfy you.
You need specifics.
You do. The principles, the roadmap, are supposedly already in the book.
Yeah.
So any failure to start or keep going.
Is on you. Solely your responsibility.
And taking that responsibility, the author says, just requires a specific state of mind.
Something you have to create yourself, not buy.
Exactly. And the fear of poverty is defined as that harmful state of mind that just destroys any chance of achieving anything.
The chapter goes into a lot of detail about the damage it does, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. How it cripples reason, imagination, self-reliance, enthusiasm. It's a long list.
It's like a catalog of all the qualities you need for success being dismantled by this one fear.
Pretty much. It hits your personality, your thinking, willpower, ambition, even your emotions and friendships.
And all this, the text reminds us, in a world that's actually full of abundance and opportunity, the main block is often this lack of clear purpose, just overshadowed by that fear of poverty.
And the author argues this fear is so tough to beat because it's rooted deep in human history, our tendency for economic exploitation.
Right. Unlike animals hunting for food, humans have often preyed on each other financially.
And that history has left us with this deep distrust and anxiety about money, about security.
The text mentions how money influences everything: marriage, legal fights, the crazy things people do to get wealthy.
It really highlights our intense, often difficult relationship with money and the fear of not having enough.
So given how deep this fear runs, the chapter stresses doing a really honest self-analysis.
Yes, like putting yourself on trial. You're the judge, jury, prosecutor, defense, everything.
You have to face your weaknesses head on, even if it's embarrassing.
And if you can't be objective,
Find someone you trust who knows you well to be an impartial judge.
it's about digging deep, uncovering those maybe unpleasant truths, because we tend to deny our fears, right?
Absolutely. So that courageous self-look is vital. And then the chapter lists the symptoms of the fear of poverty.
This list is incredibly helpful. It makes the abstract fear concrete. It starts with indifference,
Lack of ambition, settling for less, no initiative.
then indecision, letting others think for you, always on the fence.
Followed by doubt, which shows up as making excuses, alibis, maybe envying or criticizing successful people.
Exactly. Then there's worry. That comes out as finding fault, overspending, neglecting how you look, scowling, maybe drinking too much, nervousness.
Signs of inner turmoil and overcaution.
That's focusing only on the negative, dwelling on past failures, always waiting for the right time that never comes, remembering failures, pessimism.
And the last one detailed is procrastination.
Yeah, constantly putting things off, making excuses for it, avoiding responsibility, compromising for less than you want.
It also includes lacking self-confidence, purpose, associating with others who've given up.
It's a powerful checklist for self-reflection.
hmm
Do you see these ghosts in your own mental house?
It really is like a diagnostic tool. Now, the chapter anticipates a question. Why focus so heavily on money poverty when there are other kinds of riches?
Right. The author admits other forms of wealth might be intrinsically more valuable. But the reason for the focus here is the recent widespread global experience of economic hardship.
It's addressing a fear that's hit a lot of people hard, collectively,
Exactly. And to really drive home the emotional impact, there's that quote from Whisper Pegler.
about how being broke just crushes your spirit, how money shapes how you see yourself and how others see you.
Yeah. And the text notes women might hide financial stress differently than men. And it vividly describes that awful feeling of job hunting when you're desperate.
That feeling of worthlessness, even though you haven't changed as a person.
And the stark conclusion is it is just money which makes this difference in those moments.
Those examples of tiny wages offered, like $8 a month plus state your religion, they're jarring. They show the vulnerability poverty creates.
They really do. Okay, so from that deep dive into poverty, the chapter moves to briefer looks at the other 5 fears. Next up, the fear of criticism. What are its roots, according to the text?
Well, the author isn't entirely sure, mentions politics, fashion, but leans towards an ingrained human tendency.
Which is?
Not just taking things from others, but justifying it by finding fault with them first, criticizing to make yourself feel okay about taste.
Self-serving justification through criticism. Okay.
And this fear shows up in small ways, like conforming to fashion even if it's uncomfortable. The example of tight hats causing baldness just because everyone does it.
Right. But it also hits bigger things, like being scared to voice unpopular opinions.
And the text points to history where criticism could get you killed. That leaves an inherited caution, maybe.
And the damage. It stifles initiative, imagination, individuality, self-reliance. Even well-meant criticism from parents or bosses can hurt.
So what are the symptoms listed for this one?
Things like excessive self-consciousness, lacking poise, being overly agreeable without real conviction, an inferiority complex, maybe being extravagant to impress people.
And just a general lack of initiative and ambition.
Yeah.
Because you're too worried about what others think.
Exactly. That's the core of it.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to the fear of ill health, origins, indicators.
It's linked to heredity, both physical and social, and tied closely to fears of old age and death. The author also sort of suggests some health sellers might fan the flames of this fear.
Unintentionally, perhaps?
Maybe. But the core fear is about suffering, death, and the huge cost of being sick.
And it's striking how much emphasis is put on hypochondria, real symptoms caused just by fear of disease.
It really highlights that mind-body connection, and that story about the NYC mayor supposedly calming a flu epidemic by managing the news.
Fascinating example of managing fear on a mass scale. Plus, the experiments showing people getting sick just by suggestion.
Even mentions hexing as negative thought projection causing illness. The main point seems to be that illness can start as a negative thought.
So the symptoms. Autosuggestion, constantly thinking and talking about sickness. Hypochondria itself. Avoiding exercise. Being more susceptible to actual illness.
Worrying about medical costs linking back to poverty fear. Self-coddling. Intemperance, maybe self-medicating. And obsessing over disease info and patent medicines.
A whole cycle of negative focus. Right. Next, the fear of loss of love. Where does that come from?
The author thinks maybe early human social structures, polygamy, competition for mates leading to jealousy and insecurity.
Describes it as possibly the most painful fear.
Yeah.
Capable of causing real distress, even insanity.
Yeah. And suggests that while how we partner up has changed less force, more persuasion, and material things, the basic fear of losing that connection remains.
And interestingly, suggests women might feel it more, understanding men's nature and maybe distrusting rivals.
That's what's suggested. Symptoms include jealousy, often baseless suspicion and accusations.
Fault-finding with loved ones, maybe gambling or overspending to try and buy affection.
And other insecurity signs. Insomnia, nervousness, lack of persistence, willpower, self-control, bad temper, all driven by fear of being alone or unloved.
Okay, fear number 5, old age. What are the main anxieties there?
Mostly 2 things. Fear of being poor in old age and negative cultural stories about getting old.
Plus worries about declining health, losing attractiveness, losing freedom physically and financially. That whole poorhouse fear.
Exactly. Becoming a burden, losing independence.
And the symptoms. slowing down, feeling inferior around age 40, based on the false idea that your best years are mentally over.
When the text actually says the peak is often 40-60.
All right. Also talking apologetically about your age, killing your own initiative and imagination, maybe trying too hard to act young and looking, well, a bit silly. It's a fear of decline, basically.
And finally, the big one, the fear of death, often seen as the most primal fear. What drives it, according to the chapter?
Often linked to religious dogma, fanaticism. The author notes heathens seem less afraid. It's those big unanswered questions. Where do we come from? Where do we go?
Which have been historically exploited by some religious leaders, right?
Yeah.
Promises of heaven, threats of hell.
Exactly. That fear of eternal punishment runs deep in many cultures. The text mentions the huge number of gods people have worshipped, showing the confusion around it all.
And while science and education have lessened some fear, the unknown still leaves room for anxiety. But the author stresses how useless the fear is.
Right. Death is inevitable, maybe not as bad as portrayed. It brings up that science idea. Energy and matter transform. They aren't destroyed.
So life, as energy, just transitions, doesn't end.
That's the perspective offered. Think of it as transition or peaceful sleep, not something to dread constantly.
Symptoms listed include thinking about dying instead of living, often from lack of purpose. More common in the old, but can hit the young too.
And the remedy, burning desire for achievement, useful service. It can also link to fear of poverty, leaving family destitute, or be triggered by illness, lost love, religious fanaticism.
Okay, so that covers the 6 basic fears. After that, the chapter introduces old man worry. How is worry defined and linked to these fears?
Worry is called a sustained state of mind based on fear. It works slowly, subtly, paralyzes reason, kills confidence and initiative,
And crucially, the author says worry comes from fear caused by indecision.
which means it's controllable. An unsettled mind stuck in indecision is ripe for worry, especially in uncertain economic times, that collective anxiety.
The forenza and worryitis after 1929.
Exactly. And the cure, actively cultivating the habit of making prompt, firm decisions for yourself.
Because once you decide on a course of action, the anxiety lessens.
That's the idea. That anecdote about the condemned man finding peace after deciding to accept his fate, it's powerful. Decision overcomes anxiety.
And the chapter ties the 6 fears directly to worry through indecision. So the solution is to make decisions about each fear.
Pretty much. Decide to accept death's inevitability. Decide on a plan for wealth without worry. Decide to ignore criticism. Decide to embrace old age. Decide to focus on wellness, not illness symptoms. Decide you can manage without love if necessary.
And the ultimate decision.
Decide that nothing in life is worth the cost of worry. That brings poise, peace, happiness.
The chapter also talks about fear being contagious, like vibrations.
Yeah, that fearful minds send out destructive vibrations affecting others, even animals. Uses the analogy of radio waves. Mentions mental telepathy too.
And warns that negative thoughts and words have a kickback. They harm your creativity, make your personality negative, embed in your subconscious.
Right, it's not just internal. Your fear affects others and yourself negatively long term. And it hammers home again. All good outcomes start as thought impulses.
Making it your responsibility to direct your thoughts constructively. You're the master of your destiny through thought control.
Exactly. And then the chapter introduces one more hurdle. The Devil's Workshop, or the 7th basic evil.
Which is?
Susceptibility to negative influences. This is presented as even more insidious, more dangerous potentially than the 6 fears.
So it's not a specific fear, but more like an openness to negativity.
Precisely. Fertile ground for failure. Subtle, often unconscious. It's letting discouraging opinions from others or your own negative bias take root. Successful people shield themselves. Others often don't.
And guarding against it requires constant willpower, building mental resilience.
Yes. Recognizing our tendencies towards laziness, indifference, weakness, knowing we're vulnerable to the 6 fears, consciously limiting time with negative people, not dwelling on illness thoughts, seeking out positive, independent thinkers.
Because the common failing is just leaving our minds open, unguarded to negative suggestion without realizing the harm.
That's the warning. And to help check yourself, there's that list of self-analysis test questions.
Right, designed for honest introspection. Answer them aloud, revisit weekly, maybe get feedback from someone objective.
And it circles back to that core empowering idea. You have absolute control over your thoughts. That's your divine nature, the way you shape your destiny.
Control your mind or it controls you. Be careful with your spiritual estate. Use willpower.
And it notes there's no legal protection against negative suggestion. even though it can stop you getting legally protected things. He gives those examples.
Edison, Woolworth, Washington, Ford. People who succeeded by resisting negativity, believing in their vision. Ford especially is highlighted.
As someone who mastered his mind, proving the "I never had a chance" excuse wrong, mind control comes from self-discipline, habit.
You're either the master or you're controlled. No middle ground. And the practical way. Keep your mind busy with a definite purpose, a plan.
Successful people direct their minds towards their goals. Always.
Which leads into the final section. 57 famous alibis by Old Man IF.
Ah, yes. The common excuses unsuccessful people use. The chapter lists them all, urges self-examination, and basically says the book's philosophy makes these alibis obsolete.
Why do people cling to them?
Because they created them. It's human nature to defend your own brainchild. Making alibis is a deep habit, provides justification.
Then there are those quotes about self-conquest, seeing your own flaws. From Plato, Hubbard.
Reinforcing the point, stop making excuses, look within.
And that final analogy, life is a checkerboard. Your opponent is time, hesitate, and you lose. No indecision allowed.
Right. Any past excuse is invalid now because you have the master key.
Which is?
The power to create a burning desire for definite riches. Intangible, but powerful.
No penalty for using it, but
Yeah.
the price for not using it is failure.
And the reward for using it. The satisfaction of conquering yourself, making life give you what you ask for, worth the effort.
The chapter really wraps up with that Emerson quote hint. If we are related, we have, through these pages, met. A direct connection through the ideas.
It's a strong conclusion to the core message. Overcome fear, control your thoughts.
So wrapping up this deep dive into chapter 15, we've really unpacked the links between indecision, doubt, and fear. We've gone through all 6 basic fears: poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, death, and their symptoms.
We looked at how they fuel worry, the danger of negative influences, the absolute need for self-analysis, and landed on that central theme, the power of thought and desire as the master key.
It feels like we covered all the ground. The ghosts, the trio, each fear's details, worry, influences, self-checks, the alibis, the key. Yeah, a comprehensive look.
Agreed. We've traced the chapter's argument from identifying the problems to understanding their mechanisms, and finally to the proposed solution of conscious mental control and burning desire, rendering those old excuses powerless.
So as you, the listener, move forward from this, maybe take a moment to consider which of these 6 ghosts might still be hanging around in your own mind.
And maybe more importantly, think about what first step you'll take. What initial turn of that master key will you make to start consciously taking control?
Something to reflect on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.